Okay, so let's talk about evidence and proof. Number one, the two concepts are intertwined in such a way that they cannot be removed from each other. Proof is what happens when you have a significant amount of evidence in support of a argument or a theory or a hypothesis. The evidence itself is simply parts of that. For example, this Batman example you used. You're right, the piece of paper is only evidence that someone left a piece of paper there. So your concepts of what is proof versus evidence are a little naive. You need to understand that evidence is the building blocks of proof. So the more evidence you have pointing in a certain direction, the more likely you are to have proof of whatever it's pointing to. And it also depends on the type of evidence. For instance, witnesses versus videotapes. The human mind is not a very trustworthy thing when it comes to witnessing something. It makes mistakes quite easily. It gets confused. Videotapes are a far better form of evidence because there's less chance of them having error. That doesn't mean there isn't error from them. Occasionally that does happen. So you have to look at what this evidence is in its context to determine how much it supports the proof of a thing. So don't think that they're two completely independent ideas. They're completely intertwined and must be thought of as such. Now about the fingerprints in the blood. Yes, 200 years ago they didn't have the level of sophistication to use fingerprints in blood. However, they still used other forms of circumstantial evidence, and in fact, we still use those same forms of circumstantial evidence today. For instance, the size of a shoe or a witness, things like that. We still use the exact same things today. So we've simply added to the amount of evidence that supports what we call proof. We haven't changed it. We've just added to it, and it's allowed us to become more specific about what is a proof and what isn't. Well, now this is interesting because the history of evidence and proof and how they're intertwined show that as we become more technologically advanced, we're able to look at more specific types of evidence, and they begin to point us in a more specific direction. So you would think that if your God existed, the evidence would continue to point more and more in that direction. Now later in this video you refer to the argument from design. It's a very old argument, and even in the past when it first came about, it didn't really move people to believe it simply because there are some things. It's an argument because basically it is an argument from ignorance. You're claiming that, well, look at life, it looks designed, so it must have been designed. But you haven't looked into that life to see if there is anything that can be, if, life itself can be explained in a purely naturalistic sense. Nowadays, we look at life and we see something more interesting than you could even imagine back then. We see that there is nothing in life, in organisms, that indicates an outside force that needed to design it. From a biogenesis through to the first protocells and on up to us, all we see is naturalistic processes in action. And unlike your little claim that they are pure chance, natural selection is not a chance process. It's a very derivative process, and it depends again on the survivability of groups of traits versus the non-survivability of those groups. So in the end, you've built another evolutionary straw man so you can tear it down. What we see in the natural world in regards to biology, we have seen that organic molecules develop perfectly naturally in a number of different systems. We have seen that these organic molecules can form themselves into more complex organic molecules. So we can go from the basic building blocks, such as amino acids, to peptides and then polypeptides. We go to RNA. RNA can act both as a information storage medium like DNA, it can act as something that holds genetic material, and it can act as its own catalyst for its own reproduction without the need for proteins or anything else. We see this. We've examined this. We've done it in the lab. We know that this is perfectly natural. We know that phospholipid polypeptides form natural spheroids, and those natural spheroids naturally concentrate other polypeptides and these RNA prototypes for genetics and evolution, evolutionary systems. And also we have proteinoids and all sorts of all number of things that show how self-replicating systems can develop in nature without the need of a designer. From these self-replicating systems, we have the first basic form of evolution. It's a chemical evolution in this case, not a biological evolution. Don't confuse the two. Very common for creationists to do that. And through this evolution, this chemical evolution, you have those chemicals, in this case mostly RNA, that if they're successful, they produce many offspring. Some of those offspring are different, so you still have an inheritable trait. The ones that are better survive. The ones that don't survive. This continues up through the first protocells, which we're very close to actually building on our own. And then from those protocells branches off all organisms today, from the archaea to the prokaryotic bacteria to the eukaryotes, such as ourselves, and so on. We have a long list of interrelated kinds, to use the creationist term. For instance, we have the organism kind, we have the eukaryote kind, then moves up to the, I'll just skip a few steps and go straight to the chordata kind, and then to the tetraploida kind, and then to the mammalian kind, and then to the primate kind, and then the ape kind, and then the hominid kind, and then the human kind. So we have a long list of this stuff, and we can see these steps. They're all natural. We don't need to indicate a god for any of them, simply because nothing about them is uniquely outside of natural processes and natural events. So you claim that life is an example or is evidence of a designer because life is designed. Well, you and all your creationist friends have yet to prove that life is designed. See, that's a positive statement. Life is designed. Positive statement. You must prove it. To date, evidence from every single scientific discipline actually falsifies that positive statement that life is designed, because we see every aspect of life having a natural component. It's true that people like Behe tried to prove that certain molecular machines found in bacteria were irreducibly complex, yet it was easily shown by other biologists and microbiologists that these machines were derived from earlier prototypes, and those prototypes didn't do the same function. They don't have to. Evolution's like that. If you want to claim that things are designed, and that's a positive claim, you will have to show that they are. And better people than you have tried and failed. Dubinsky was shown that his models and statistical models trying to develop a way of determining what was designed and what isn't, it was shown that his models were poorly put together. There were too many holes in them. If you read the book Scientists Confront Creationism, you find striking arguments against Dubinsky's view of intelligent design. Behe was made literally a fool of in a court of law by scientists that knew that his claims were, well, bull. So far the positive claim that animals and organisms are designed has failed at every test. If you can provide proof, and remember, proof is simply a collection of evidences that support your argument. If you can find this collection of evidences that support your argument that life is designed, please present them. If not, try to do something else, because you did a bad job on this. And lastly, science has accumulated mass amounts of evidence for supporting their theories. So basically, we have the evidence, we win. Simple as that. But if you can provide something that contradicts our evidence, please go ahead.